Keisha clutched her belly as another wave of pain shot through her. Her breath came in short gasps as she gripped the car door handle. Her husband, Marcus, had just dropped her off at the hospital entrance, rushing to park the car before joining her inside. She felt anxious but also excited. Today was the day she would finally meet her baby. A nurse at the reception desk barely glanced at her. Keisha forced a smile and said, "I'm in labor. The pain is really bad." The nurse, a woman with short blonde hair and tired eyes, sighed as if Keisha had interrupted something important. "Name?" she asked in a bored tone, tapping at her computer. "Keisha Bennett," she replied through clenched teeth. The nurse typed slowly, taking her time as if Keisha wasn't standing there, struggling to breathe. "First baby." Keisha nodded. "Yes, and my contractions are really close together." The nurse gave her a quick look and smirked. "Oh honey, first-time moms always think the pain is worse than it is. You'll be fine. Just sit over there and wait until we call you." She pointed to a row of plastic chairs near the entrance. Keisha frowned. Wasn't she supposed to go straight to a room? She had read about labor procedures, and she was sure the hospital should check her right away. "But my water broke," she said, her voice shaking. "Shouldn't someone check me?" The nurse rolled her eyes. "Sweetheart, if we rushed every woman who thought she was having a baby, we'd have no beds left. Go sit down. I'll call you when I can." Keisha's heart pounded. The pain was growing stronger, and standing was becoming unbearable. She looked around, hoping to see someone else who could help her. A few other nurses were nearby, but they were busy talking among themselves, ignoring her. With no other choice, Keisha shuffled to the waiting area, gripping the chair for support as she sat down. She bit her lip, trying to hold back tears. The contractions were getting worse, coming every few minutes, but no one seemed to care. A few minutes later, another woman walked in. A younger woman with light skin, barely showing any signs of discomfort. The same nurse immediately smiled at her. "Oh, sweetie, come right in," she said, leading the woman straight to a wheelchair and into a room. Keisha watched in shock. How was that fair? She wanted to speak up, to demand the same treatment, but she was in too much pain. Instead, she focused on her breathing, hoping Marcus would arrive soon. Outside, Marcus was hurrying into the hospital. He had parked as quickly as possible, eager to be by his wife's side. But as soon as he stepped inside and saw her sitting in the waiting area, holding her stomach in agony, his eyes darkened. Something wasn't right, and he was about to find out exactly what was going on. Keisha clutched her belly as another wave of pain shot through her. Her breath came in short gasps as she gripped the car door handle. Her husband, Marcus, had just dropped her off at the hospital entrance, rushing to park the car before joining her inside. She felt anxious but also excited. Today was the day she would finally meet her baby. A nurse at the reception desk barely glanced at her. Keisha forced a smile and said, "I'm in labor. The pain is really bad." The nurse, a woman with short blonde hair and tired eyes, sighed as if Keisha had interrupted something important. "Name?" she asked in a bored tone, tapping at her computer. "Keisha Bennett," she replied through clenched teeth. The nurse typed slowly, taking her time as if Keisha wasn't standing there, struggling to breathe. "First baby." Keisha nodded. "Yes, and my contractions are really close together." The nurse gave her a quick look and smirked. "Oh honey, first-time moms always think the pain is worse than it is. You'll be fine. Just sit over there and wait until we call you." She pointed to a row of plastic chairs near the entrance. Keisha frowned. Wasn't she supposed to go straight to a room? She had read about labor procedures, and she was sure the hospital should check her right away. "But my water broke," she said, her voice shaking. "Shouldn't someone check me?" The nurse rolled her eyes. "Sweetheart, if we rushed every woman who thought she was having a baby, we'd have no beds left. Go sit down. I'll call you when I can." Keisha's heart pounded. The pain was growing stronger, and standing was becoming unbearable. She looked around, hoping to see someone else who could help her. A few other nurses were nearby, but they were busy talking among themselves, ignoring her. With no other choice, Keisha shuffled to the waiting area, gripping the chair for support as she sat down. She bit her lip, trying to hold back tears. The contractions were getting worse, coming every few minutes, but no one seemed to care. A few minutes later, another woman walked in. A younger woman with light skin, barely showing any signs of discomfort. The same nurse immediately smiled at her. "Oh, sweetie, come right in," she said, leading the woman straight to a wheelchair and into a room. Keisha watched in shock. How was that fair? She wanted to speak up, to demand the same treatment, but she was in too much pain. Instead, she focused on her breathing, hoping Marcus would arrive soon. Outside, Marcus was hurrying into the hospital. He had parked as quickly as possible, eager to be by his wife's side. But as soon as he stepped inside and saw her sitting in the waiting area, holding her stomach in agony, his eyes darkened. Something wasn't right, and he was about to find out exactly what was going on. Marcus felt his heart tighten as he looked at his wife. Keisha's face was pale, and she was breathing heavily, clearly in pain. He couldn't believe she was still sitting in the waiting area when she should have been taken to a room immediately. He turned to the nurse approaching with the wheelchair. "Why is my wife still here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Linda blinked, surprised by his tone. "Sir, she's fine. First-time moms always think labor is worse than it actually is." She forced a small smile. "We were just about to take her in." Marcus didn't return her smile. Instead, he studied her face, his sharp eyes catching every small detail, the lack of urgency, the dismissive attitude, and the way she avoided direct eye contact. He had seen this kind of behavior before. It was the look of someone who didn't care. Keisha reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly as another contraction hit. Marcus immediately knelt beside her. "I'm here, baby. Just hold on," he whispered. Keisha took a shaky breath. "It hurts so much," she said softly. Marcus stood up and looked directly at Linda. "Get my wife a room. Now." His voice was calm, but there was an authority in it that made the younger nurse nearby straighten her posture. Linda hesitated for a second, then forced another fake smile. "Of course, sir." She gestured toward the wheelchair. "Let's get you comfortable, Mrs. Bennett." Keisha carefully got into the wheelchair, and Marcus walked beside her as they moved down the hallway. He stayed silent, watching everything closely. When they reached a small room, Linda parked the wheelchair near the bed. "Go ahead and change into the hospital gown," she said. "A doctor will see you when one is available." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "You mean to tell me there's no doctor available right now?" Linda sighed. "They're busy. But don't worry, we'll check her in a bit." That was it. Marcus had heard enough. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Dr. Patel, this is Dr. Marcus Bennett," he said, his voice sharp. "I need you in labor and delivery. Now." Linda's face froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Dr. Marcus Bennett. Her eyes widened as realization hit her like a wave. She had just dismissed the wife of one of the hospital's most powerful surgeons. Not just any doctor, one of the board members. Marcus caught the flicker of panic in her eyes, but he didn't react. Instead, he turned back to Keisha, who was struggling to sit up. He kissed her forehead gently. "You're in good hands now, baby," he whispered. "I promise." Linda swallowed hard. She had no idea who she had been dealing with. And now, it was too late to undo what she had done. Linda's hands trembled slightly as she stepped back. She had been working at this hospital for years, treating patients however she wanted, never worrying about consequences. But now, she realized she had made a terrible mistake. Dr. Marcus Bennett wasn't just any man. He was one of the most respected surgeons in the city. His reputation was flawless, his skills unmatched, and most importantly, he was on the hospital's board of directors. She had ignored his wife. She had dismissed her pain. And now she was about to face the consequences. Keisha, still breathing heavily, lay back on the hospital bed. The pain was unbearable, but knowing Marcus was there gave her a small sense of relief. He wouldn't let anything happen to her. He never did. Within minutes, Dr. Patel, a senior obstetrician, rushed into the room. His face was slightly flushed, his glasses sliding down his nose as he hurried toward the bed. "Dr. Bennett," he greeted nervously. "I came as soon as I got your call." Marcus nodded. "My wife has been in severe pain, and no one bothered to check her," he said, his voice controlled but sharp. "She needs immediate care." Dr. Patel turned to Keisha, quickly putting on gloves before examining her. His expression changed almost instantly. "She's already dilated 8 centimeters, he said in shock. "She should have been in delivery hours ago." Marcus's jaw tightened. He turned toward Linda, who stood frozen near the door. "You told my wife she was overreacting," he said slowly. "Do you still think that?" Linda opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked around as if searching for someone to defend her, but the room was silent. The younger nurse from earlier lowered her gaze, clearly uncomfortable. The other staff members in the room stood still, waiting to see what would happen next. Dr. Patel, sensing the tension, cleared his throat. "We need to get Mrs. Bennett to the delivery room immediately," he said. "She's in active labor." Marcus nodded, stepping closer to Keisha and taking her hand. "You're almost there, baby," he whispered. "Just a little longer." Keisha tried to smile through the pain. "Thank you for being here," she whispered back. Linda, still standing near the door, felt her stomach drop. She wanted to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. Just then, another hospital administrator walked in, a tall woman in a navy blue suit. She glanced at Marcus, then at Linda. "Dr. Bennett," she said formally. "I was informed of the situation. Rest assured, this will be handled immediately." Marcus didn't respond. He simply turned back to his wife, his focus solely on her. As the nurses rushed to prepare Keisha for delivery, Linda knew her time at this hospital was coming to an end. And it was all because she had chosen to ignore the wrong patient. Keisha gripped Marcus's hand tightly as another painful contraction hit her. She gasped, feeling like her body was working against her, but she reminded herself that she was almost there. Her baby was coming soon. The nurses moved quickly now, preparing her for delivery. The energy in the room had completely shifted. Unlike before, when she had been ignored, now everyone was paying full attention to her. Dr. Patel gave clear instructions, checking her condition and making sure everything was ready. Marcus stayed by her side the entire time, whispering words of encouragement. "You're doing amazing, baby. Just breathe. I'm right here." His voice was steady, comforting, exactly what she needed. But while Keisha focused on getting through the pain, Marcus kept a sharp eye on the people in the room, especially Linda. She stood stiffly in the corner, avoiding eye contact, clearly uncomfortable. She wasn't in charge anymore. The hospital administrator, Ms. Reynolds, walked up to her with a serious expression. "Nurse Linda," she said firmly, "please step outside. We need to speak." Linda swallowed hard. "I was just..." Ms. Reynolds cut her off. "Now." Without another word, Linda turned and walked out, her face pale. Keisha didn't see her go, but Marcus did. He wasn't the type of man who liked to see people lose their jobs. But today was different. His wife had suffered because of Linda's negligence. What if he hadn't arrived in time? What if no one had checked Keisha until it was too late? The thought made his stomach tighten. Right now, though, his only focus was Keisha. Dr. Patel checked her again and gave a small nod. "It's time," he said. "You're fully dilated. We're going to start pushing soon." Keisha let out a shaky breath. She was exhausted, but she was ready. Marcus leaned in, kissing her forehead gently. "You got this, baby," he whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Tears welled up in Keisha's eyes, but they weren't from pain this time. They were from love, the love she felt for the man standing beside her. for the little life she was about to bring into the world. The room was calm but focused. The nurses guided Keisha through each step, giving her clear instructions. Unlike before, she was now surrounded by people who cared, people who were actually listening. As she took a deep breath and prepared for the final stage, she felt something she hadn't felt since arriving at the hospital. Safety. Because no matter what happened, Marcus was here. And she knew he would never let anything happen to her or their child. Outside the delivery room, Linda sat in a small office, staring at the floor. She had thought she could treat patients however she wanted. She had thought no one would ever question her. But today, she had learned a lesson she would never forget. Keisha squeezed Marcus's hand as she took a deep breath, trying to prepare herself for what was coming next. The pain was intense, but she knew she was almost there. She had waited 9 long months for this moment, and now it was finally happening. Dr. Patel stood at the foot of the bed, his voice calm but firm. "All right, Keisha. On the next contraction, I need you to push with all your strength." Keisha nodded, her heart pounding. She was tired, more tired than she had ever been in her life. But she wasn't going to give up. Marcus leaned close to her ear. "You're doing amazing, baby. Just a little more. I believe in you." She let out a shaky breath. "I can do this," she whispered to herself. The contraction hit, and Keisha gritted her teeth as she pushed with all her might. The pressure was unbearable, but she didn't stop. She could hear Dr. Patel's voice, the nurses encouraging her, but most of all, she could feel Marcus's hand holding hers, grounding her, reminding her that she wasn't alone. "Good, Keisha, you're doing great," Dr. Patel said. "One more big push." Keisha gathered every last bit of strength she had and pushed again. And then, a tiny, piercing cry filled the room. Tears instantly welled up in Keisha's eyes as she fell back against the pillow, gasping for air. Her entire body trembled with exhaustion, but nothing else mattered anymore. She had done it. Marcus's eyes were wide, his lips slightly parted in shock. He had seen many births before as a doctor, but this was different. This was his child, his family. One of the nurses carefully wrapped the tiny baby in a warm blanket before placing the newborn in Keisha's arms. "It's a beautiful baby girl," Dr. Patel announced with a smile. Keisha let out a soft sob as she looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. Her baby. Their baby. Marcus sat beside her, his eyes filled with emotions he couldn't even put into words. He gently touched his daughter's tiny fingers, his heart swelling with love. "She's perfect," he whispered. Keisha sniffled and nodded. "She really is." The room, which had been filled with stress and tension just hours ago, was now peaceful, filled only with the quiet sounds of their newborn daughter. Outside the delivery room, Linda sat alone in the hospital office, her head in her hands. She knew her time here was over. And now, as she listened to the joyful cries of the baby she had once ignored, she realized just how much she had failed. But inside the room, none of that mattered anymore. Because for Marcus and Keisha, this was the happiest moment of their lives. And nothing, absolutely nothing, could take that away from them. Keisha gazed down at her newborn daughter, her heart swelling with love. The tiny baby lay peacefully in her arms, her little fingers curled into a fist. Keisha traced a gentle finger over her soft cheek, amazed at how perfect she was. Marcus sat beside her, unable to take his eyes off the two most important people in his life. He had spent years saving lives as a doctor, but this moment, this was different. Nothing compared to seeing his wife and child safe, happy, and together. "She's so beautiful," Keisha whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Marcus smiled and leaned down, pressing a soft kiss on Keisha's forehead, just like her mother. Keisha let out a small laugh, though she was still exhausted. She rested her head back against the pillow, her body finally relaxing now that the pain was gone. A nurse gently walked in, checking on the baby and making sure everything was fine. "Would you like to hold her, Dr. Bennett?" she asked. smiling at Marcus. Marcus hesitated for a second, his hand suddenly feeling too big, too strong for something so small and delicate. But when Keisha nodded at him encouragingly, he carefully reached out and took his daughter into his arms. The moment he held her, something inside him shifted. He had spent his whole life working in hospitals, making tough decisions, leading surgeries, and handling pressure. But right now, as his tiny daughter rested in his arms, he realized this was the most important job he would ever have, being her father. "Hey, princess," he whispered, his voice softer than ever. The baby let out a tiny yawn, making his heart melt. Keisha watched him, smiling. She had always known Marcus would be an amazing father, but seeing him hold their baby with so much love made her fall in love with him all over again. Just then, there was a small knock on the door. The hospital administrator, Ms. Reynolds, peeked in. "I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing," she said warmly. Keisha nodded. "I'm doing well. Thank you." Ms. Reynolds turned to Marcus, her expression growing more serious. "Dr. Bennett, I wanted to personally apologize for what happened earlier. The way your wife was treated was unacceptable." Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, but he simply nodded. "I appreciate you handling it." Ms. Reynolds sighed. "Linda has been dismissed from the hospital. We can't have nurses who ignore patients in pain." Keisha exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She hadn't wanted to think about Linda anymore, but it was good to know that no other mother would have to experience what she did. Marcus looked down at his daughter, then at his wife. "All that matters now is them," he said simply. And in that moment, nothing else mattered, because their little family was finally complete. Keisha sat up slightly in her hospital bed, watching Marcus as he held their newborn daughter. The way he looked at their baby, with so much love and tenderness, filled her heart with warmth. She felt exhausted, but the happiness in her chest made her forget all the pain she had endured just hours ago. A nurse walked in, smiling as she checked Keisha's vitals. "You're recovering well," she said. "Your little one is perfectly healthy too." Keisha let out a sigh of relief. "That's all that matters." Marcus gently rocked their daughter in his arms, his expression soft. "Have you thought of a name?" he asked, glancing at Keisha. She smiled, already knowing the perfect name. "What about Mia?" she suggested. "It means beloved." Marcus looked down at his daughter, then back at Keisha. "Mia Bennett," he whispered. "I love it." Keisha reached out, and Marcus carefully placed baby Mia back into her arms. The baby let out a tiny yawn before settling against her mother's chest. Keisha kissed the top of her daughter's head, closing her eyes for a moment, feeling complete. A soft knock on the door made them look up. A group of hospital staff stood there, including Ms. Reynolds and some nurses. They held a bouquet of flowers and a small gift basket. "We just wanted to properly congratulate you," Ms. Reynolds said warmly, "and also to apologize again for what happened earlier. It was unacceptable, and we are taking steps to ensure that no patient is ever treated that way again." Keisha smiled slightly. "I appreciate that." One of the younger nurses stepped forward nervously. "I just wanted to say, I saw how you were treated, and I regret not speaking up sooner. It wasn't right." Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded. "It takes courage to admit that. The important thing is that you learn from it." The nurse nodded gratefully before stepping back. Ms. Reynolds placed the bouquet on the bedside table. "Enjoy this special time with your family," she said before leading the group out. The room grew quiet again, leaving just the three of them, Marcus, Keisha, and baby Mia. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and took Keisha's hand in his. "We went through a lot today," he said, his thumb gently rubbing her knuckles. "But look at what we got in the end." Keisha smiled. She was worth every second of it. Marcus leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You're the strongest woman I know," he whispered, "and the best mother Mia could ever have." Keisha felt tears well up in her eyes again, happy tears this time. As baby Mia slept peacefully in her arms, Keisha and Marcus knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of their beautiful journey as a family. And no matter what challenges came next, they would face them together.